Greetings, future fossils. This is Michael Garfield welcoming you to another episode of the podcast that explores our place in time. I apologize for this show being much later than usual. You think this would be more of a frequent problem on the show given the amount of airtime I devote to the turbulence and unpredictability of our age. But no, it just turns out that it's actually the predictable things that stand in the way sometimes. I'm still adjusting to the new life conditions here in Santa Fe, new job, new place, baby on the way. And I just recently gave a milestone presentation at the Santa Fe Institute where I work, a review of literature from a number of different scientific disciplines, pointing towards what I see as an emerging new paradigm in evolutionary theory. Now, admittedly, this talk was a little weird. I am staff, not research, at this estimable research institution, and it's a little unusual for the social media guy to give a science talk there. So this was really something more like an invitation to the official scientists at SFI to help me articulate and formalize this synthesis I have been building on for the last 15 years. And if you want to know more about that, I'll be posting details, including the massive mind map I made of academic papers and linked ideas, to Patreon, which also, by the way, I'm excited to announce will be hosting the second book club discussion on Diana Reed Slattery's fantastic xenolinguistics next month. So if you would like to be in on that, just hop on over to Patreon. Anyway, now is a good time to thank all of the new Patreon supporters. That includes Max Compton, Luke Aiden, Russell Bradbury Carlin, Josh Ackmans, Robert Vincent Levy, and Mike Schwab, who is a patron at the highest level, and you'll be hearing about his cool startup here on subsequent episodes of the show now that Mike's stepping into that featured sponsor position. Big thanks to all of you. Big thanks to everyone who has been rating and reviewing this show on iTunes. That is an enormous help, as ridiculous as it is, and as little as I want to play into the trillion-dollar agenda of a company that won my heart by selling me fruit-colored computers back in the 90s. But oh well. All of us have been tricked to some degree by the primary colors and bubbly user interfaces of our tech overlords as they step insidiously between us, attempting to replace the cornucopia of countless free services that we provided one another in our tribal groupings once upon a time with paid on-demand services to make our bizarre, frequently dehumanizing modern lives more convenient. Yeah, the fact is, I don't know how we scale human intimacy in the internet age. I don't know how we replace all of the affection and closeness and touch that we had living in these tight-knit family groups that have been lost, largely, in an age of suburbs and commutes and long-distance travel to visit family over holidays. I mean, I know I'm thinking about this stuff a lot lately because my partner and I just bounced hundreds of miles from our entire support networks. And yet, you know, this is an ongoing question. I remember this coming up for me for the first time reading Jennifer Cobb's Cyber Grace back in 2003 or so. She was talking about how the internet was basically designed by people with little sense of appreciation for their bodies and the richness of the human somatic experience. Of course, now, 15 years later, it looks spookily like the body is going into these spaces, and yet it's still not enough. It's still not actually providing the really important thing, which is human touch. The sense of being held and loved unconditionally. I mean, however supported you feel by Google or Apple or whatever, No matter how catered to you feel when you whisper your desires to Alexa, and then they magically appear on the back of a drone mere hours later. That's great and all, but isn't it possibly just a compensation for the lack of unconditional love and support that you currently feel? Isn't consumer convenience just a Band-Aid that we're slapping on the gushing open wound of our digitized humanity in an age of predatory surveillance capitalism and real-time behavioral control? Folks, what are we going to do about this? Well, luckily, this week we have Epiphany Jordan on the show, author of the recently published book, Somebody Hold Me, The Single Person's Guide to Nurturing Human Touch. I met Epiphany in Austin, where she works on the Karuna Sessions, which is a really beautiful program where she and her partner help people satisfy their non-romantic touch needs. You know, the human skin has a quota. Most of us aren't meeting it. And a lot of problems we're trying to solve with shopping or pills or other diversions are better solved by letting two people hug you for a while, look in your eyes, tell you it's going to be okay. So Epiphany has a great angle on this situation and some great advice for folks who feel deprived. I'm really glad that we get to share this one with you. I hope it hasn't arrived too late. Enjoy.
I'm actually, it's like I come in his office and I'm like, hey dude, and he's like, he does not like loud noises.
Well, the future probably is so loud, as we were just talking about this. Like maybe if
I don't want the future to be loud. I like it quiet. I'm pissed that I can like hear the freeway now. Like when I moved into my house 15 years ago, I couldn't so much. Yeah. I live about less than a mile from I-35, but I finally realized that all the freeway noise comes down the river.
Oh yeah.
And now there's a lot of freeway noise, so I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll lay there and I'll be like, oh, traffic. Fuck this.
Well, it's not just any traffic; it's I-35 traffic. So you might take some consolation in it being like you're like a fetus in the womb of America listening to the veins of your mother, you know?
Right. Unfortunately, I mean, I could take solace in the fact that, it's usually bumper to bumper, so there's not that much noise because nobody's moving. But at 4 a.m, that's actually not the case. It moves pretty well.
Better traffic than a cat that your girlfriend got when you were on a temporary breakup. But,
oh no!
Yeah.
Oh, but she's so cute.
Yeah, she is. Anyway, hello, Epiphany Jordan. Welcome to Future Fossils.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
So, one of the things that I'm excited about talking with you today, because we talk a lot about what would be like, what will change about being human in the futures we imagine, and what won't. And I kind of want to start this out by talking to my dad a few years ago about teleconferences and how I was so sure that teleconferences were going to replace the face-to-face conversation, like the one we're having right now. And he insisted, because he was doing, like corporate like the best teleconference stuff you could have, his company was using. And he's like, it's still not enough. And it won't be enough, because there will always be this thing about shaking somebody's hand. Mm-hmm. And over the last few years, I think I've come around to his point of view, which is that the internet, or like digital technologies in general, really are not capable of providing a sufficient replacement for direct human interaction, and specifically the communication of human touch.
Yes.
And so this is why I'm excited that we have the author of a book about touch and touch deprivation on
That
the
is
show.
correct.
So why did you write this book? Why do you care?
That's a good question, and I need to come up with a good answer because people often ask that. For the past 5 years, I've had a business here in Austin called Karuna Sessions, and what we do is we provide a ritual of human connection that is centered around touch, and it culminates in the client being held in between two practitioners. And this is how we take care of our human young, and it's like your body remembers that feeling, and it's like, this is what it feels like to feel cared for and nurtured and safe and loved. And the genesis of the book came about. I actually started writing the book while I was still in a relationship about 1.5 years ago. And then after I broke up with my partner of 5 years, I realized that, it's like if I wasn't in a sexual or romantic relationship, that meant that I probably wasn't getting my touch needs met. I have, being female, I have, friends that I'm very touchy-feely with. We're always like hugging each other, hello and goodbye, which not everybody has that. But when I started digging into it a little bit more, I realized, I had realized this for a while, but because our culture equates sex with touch, if you're not in a sexual or a romantic relationship, you're not getting your touch needs met. And almost 50% of the American population is now identifies as single. And so that's leaving a lot of people without touch. And I think it's starting to bite us in the ass. It's affecting us in a lot of different ways.
I heard on, I think it was Chris Ryan's podcast, Tangentially Speaking. He was talking about how, and he's mentioned this in a couple episodes, where they said there's some research study where they looked at the amount of touch that people were getting as infants, and then they followed them to adulthood, and they looked at how likely are these people, how well are they doing in life? How likely are they to be violent criminals, like that kind of thing? And the people who were touch deprived were often the ones who were lashing out as adults with all kinds, like violent behaviors, and were not the students, school-age kids, were not performing as well in school if they were deprived of touch. So this seems like just one more of those really, like, how did we miss this kind of things about civilization? Like, where did we go wrong?
I think it's an interesting question. Another friend of mine who does professional cuddling recently brought a book to my attention that's called The Deepest Sense, and it's about touch in the Middle Ages. And touch in the body, were kind of considered like lower, or, something that wasn't, because it's not as close to God and so forth. And so it was kind of deprioritized. As far as today, it's hard to have a conversation about touch because, we tend to go to the idea of, oh, there's too much touch, there's all this non-consensual touch. And it's like we've lumped everything in with that. It was funny when you were talking about your dad with the business meetings, work is a place that's fraught. And I just came upon an article that in Great Britain, I think they're talking about, adding like cuddle parties and stuff as like something you can do as a team building exercise at work. And I was just like, oh man, this is not going to end well. But, it's where, it's this weird thing, where we have too much non-consensual touch, but then on the other side, it's like people are very touch deprived. And it's like, how do we design something going forward where we hit that sweet spot where we have, where people are getting their touch needs met? Because actually, I think that when people don't get their touch needs met, it kind of feeds into the non-consensual touch. It's like a starving person, stealing a loaf of bread or something.
Yeah, I had a friend who had a sexual harassment claim filed against him for just this was years before this was like a mainstream media issue, the way it is today. But I remember him being so like surprised and horrified because he's just a very like touchy, casual, affectionate person. And when he realized that I don't remember what it was, he like patted a girl on the back or something or whatever it was. And he just, for it to come around on him like that, it's obvious. It's like you said, it's obvious that if we are touch deprived, that people are going to just reach out to one another more often in ways that are, not necessarily, that are like more desperate or whatever. But I think you're right to put it in the history of like body hate, and this
transcending the body and the mind-body split as well that, kind of took place around the Renaissance.
But then you get into this thing where it's like, we're in a weird time, right? Where as we are moving away from a primarily visual communications media, just print, which, Marshall McLuhan talks about print being inherently isolating. Reading a book is usually a solitary activity. You're holding it at arm's length. It's about the imagination more than it is about the sensation. Rather, storytelling as a contrast, is so much about the energy, the dynamism of the storyteller, listening to them, feeling their presence. And it seems like we're moving back towards something more like that in the shift toward, podcasting and video and haptic feedback vests and all these like weird technologies that are mapping senses onto other senses, and the skin becoming... Like you wear a bracelet that will feed some data into your, through vibrations into your arm, and you learn what these vibration buzz, the pulses mean and all this stuff. So we're becoming touchier in a way, but it's like you're saying, it's like at this time where in a way we've also lost some of the basic, not pre-verbal understanding of touch and how to touch each other at all. You go to Europe and it's like they're kissing each other on the face, and Americans are just, I feel like we're like people that were like somebody that was in jail for 20 years and then cell phones happened while he was in jail, and now he's like, what do I do with this? I feel like that's where America in particular is with being physical.
Well, I mean, you have to take into consideration, one of the things that I wrote about that I've noticed is, people have different levels of comfort with touch, and, cultures certainly feed into it. Like I saw this incredible, I can't remember what it was a commercial for, but it was about this Japanese woman who was in her 30s maybe, and after the earthquake in 2011, her parents were worried about Fukushima, so they sent her to the United States. And as she was leaving, they took her to the airport, to put her on a plane for the United States, and they did not hug her goodbye because it's so not part of their culture. And so the commercial is her parents come to the United States to visit her, and she takes them. She's living in California, Southern California. She takes them to the beach, and she asks them to hug her because they don't do that, and they all end up hugging, and it's really sweet. I was crying by the time it was done. But we have such a mix of cultures here, and then people have so many personal preferences that it's like we have to do something to kind of to honor that, because there are a lot of people who don't like to be touched. I mean, I have a bunch of friends who are super touch sensitive, and it's like they get into situations and places where there are a lot of touchy-feely people around, and they're just curled in a fetal ball in the corner because they're so they so dislike it. So we really need to come up with a way to for, people to be able to touch each other in a way that it feels good and is consensual, because not everybody likes the same thing. I mean, it may feel super good to you to hug someone, but, the person who's getting the hug, that might be their worst nightmare. They may have, horrible memories of, like a drunk aunt, like slobbering on them when they were children or something. I mean, you just don't know what it is. And it's so simple just to ask somebody, would you like a hug? Mm-hmm. And so, but it's like, we don't even know how to do that. And so we just all err on the side of super caution. I was actually, a while back, I was talking to a friend. There's a really famous study by Sidney Girard that you'll see referenced around touch all the time, where in the late 60s, he goes to different countries and observes people sitting in a cafe and talking, and how many times they touch each other. In the United States, it was twice. And in Puerto Rico, I think it was like 160 times or something.
Oh,
I know, yeah, but it's also a super happy country. And I remember talking to this woman who was from Puerto Rico, and she was saying, she was a sex therapist actually, and she was saying how much she missed that physicality of the culture. And I was like, well, I'm sure you have kids there who are like super touch sensitive, and that is just their idea of hell. And she's like, yeah, I can totally see that. If you don't want to be touched and you are, it's like, it doesn't, if it's not consensual, if somebody doesn't want to be touched, it's not going to feel good to them.
So I wonder though, are there as many people who are touch sensitive in that way in a culture that's as touchy like that? Because how much of that is like, if you're not getting enough sunlight, right? And then you go outside and it's like, the vampire
right.
shrink, or if you're not getting enough of some kind of nutrient, sometimes your body will reject it just because it's not accustomed to it. And I wonder, around this conversation, this is actually in a way, this is an issue that's less charged than other similar issues right now, and so maybe therefore a better place to look at this particular question, which is it okay for us to regard touch sensitivity like this as a disorder or as a perversion? I mean, because it's like, if you're on the one hand, we're arguing that touch is good for you. So if you're somebody that avoids or refuses something that the science suggests is generally of benefit, then is that, are all of these people like traumatized? Is it just a symptom of an underlying pathology? Or see, I don't know any about this.
So that's a great question. I think there is in a lot of cases. I mean, like I'm thinking of a couple of friends of mine in particular who are super touch sensitive, who have a lot of trauma in their childhood. But then, when you look at something like autism, where touch just completely overwhelms them. Like, I don't know if you know this or not, but a lot of times autistic folks love those Zentai suits, where you're just completely covered from head to toe, and it covers your hands and your feet and your face, because, they're enclosed, and it's like, it's buffering them from too much sensation. But in my perfect world, and the kind of the way that I set up the book, it has to be consensual. If you don't want to be touched, it's not going to feel good. I come across a lot of people who rationalize away their need for it, who are like, oh, I don't need that, and then once they start getting touched, they're like, oh man, that feels really good. It's like, it's like if you're starving and like somebody offers you food and you don't want to like jump on it or something. The touch hunger description or metaphor is a really good one, because if I had my druthers, we would reframe this as a health and wellness thing, just like food, drink, eating the right food, drinking enough water, getting exercise and sleep, and touch, boom, you throw it on there, and it's got a healthy thing. So I don't want to, I don't think it's a good idea to force anyone to be touched when they don't want to. So, it's such an individual thing, there's never going to be a one size fits all solution for this. So I don't know if
unless it's like a one size fits all Snuggie. Right.
Yeah, exactly. But you have to let people come to it on their own. And and there's certainly like a lot of mental gauntlets that people have to run through, like my friends that I'm thinking of who are super touch sensitive. It's like, they have a good reason for distrusting people. And both of them are like super touchy-feely with people that they know and they trust. You see that a lot, but with just the general public, it's like, they don't, they would prefer it if nobody touched them at all that they didn't know.
I guess the sort of deeper layer of this is it an issue to pathologize this? Like not like, should we touch these people without their consent? Because I remember being that guy. I remember like I couldn't hug anybody at all until I was in high school theater, and it was like. And
then you had to.
It was sort of.
So I'm curious what changed for you about that, or how did you get through it?
I was sort of pressured into it, but in a way that was not. My friends just were like, you're gonna get used to this, but it's not like that's not a style I would necessarily recommend.
Right.
But at the same time, exposure therapy over time does seem to address these sort of fear-based symptoms in all kinds of stuff. I only bring this up just because it's like, there are, to take it completely in a weird dogleg direction, there was all the controversy around that TEDx talk recently where this woman was talking about pedophilia as a sexual
category,
like and
them trying to like jump on the LGBTQIA bandwagon.
QIA for and so like a lot of people were saying, hey, there's no way you're trying to normalize this, and then but then people on the other side were saying, well, hey, we need to recognize that there's a difference between like homicidal ideation and homicide,
right?
And that we can't, we shouldn't demonize people just for the thoughts that they're having if they're not acting on it. And then you get into this whole, it's like, or like drug abuse, it's like this question of separating sort of the conditions of what's going on inside of a person mentally. And then, so around that issue, there was this whole thing around, at what point is it legitimate to cross the line into calling something a mental disorder,
Yeah.
And not because it's not a judgment on the person. It's not it doesn't license you to administer treatment to that person without their consent. But like, does it help us as a society to think about touch aversion as an issue?
I think we have to. I mean, I am pretty inclined to leave those people alone. I mean, I actually wrote the last chapter of the book is called "Don't Touch Me," and it's about how you navigate. Like the book's kind of written for people. It's for people in alternative communities, which tend to be really touchy-feely, and people who are in those groups who don't like to be touched are like, "What the fuck? Get off of me!" And so. I'm more inclined to focus on the people who know that they're touch deprived and want more touch, and then, if you're a touch averse person and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'll try this, then great, and you get to make up your own mind about it. But, and I think there's a lot of people in that category, or people are starting to recognize, they're like, oh, this is a problem that I have, or a lot of people know that there's something wrong, or they feel like there's something missing, but they just don't know quite what it is.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a moment ago, you were talking about the autistic people wrapping themselves
In
in
the
the full
Zentai
body.
suits, yeah.
And it reminded me of Temple Grandin. Do you know?
Yes.
Yeah, and how she came up with the hugging machine
Yep.
based on her work with cattle chutes and like
Yep.
what it takes to make a cow feel secure on the way to the slaughter.
Right.
Is you put them in these things where they're being squeezed on both sides, and then so there's a documentary about her where it shows her in her house with the hugging machine, so that she doesn't have to hug another person, but that she still gets that
Right.
touch need met. And I'm curious. That seems, in some sense, to be where this goes, is that suddenly a niche opens up where we acknowledge, you need to get touched, but not by a person. And that there might be all sorts of like prosthetic, like my friend's friend has a company where they make those heavy blankets now. They're like swaddling blankets for adults.
Yeah.
And like that kind of thing. We'll start seeing more and more
Right.
like womb simulators.
There actually is a I saw that, I think it was a crew in Germany that made a hugging machine that, I don't know, maybe they'll bring it to South by this year or something. But there were a lot of people who liked it because they were super awkward with other people. Another thing that they said is that they liked it because they didn't have to worry about being rejected, or like asking somebody. Well, I mean, oh my God, that's a whole nother story. But I mean, we're already seeing this. I mean, look at how people are with their pets. I mean, when I was working downtown, when I was doing my gig economy stuff, and like for a while I was doing Instacart, and I would be in like all these like super fancy high-rise buildings and people with their dogs. Oh my God, it was just like, I mean, people have these incredibly intimate relationships with their pets now, and that is a great source of companionship and touch for a lot of people. But I don't, it's nice. I think it's nice to have the option of having a hugging machine or something, like if you are, super awkward with humans or something. But I mean, that touch is human. I mean, this is, like you were talking about with, noticing the effects of touch deprivation on kids, like, years and years later, it's so, I mean, that is how we raise our human young, but it's also how we started as a species. I mean, when we were living in caves thousands and thousands of years ago, we would sleep in giant piles for warmth and safety. I mean, human beings need other human beings, and it's one of the shortest and simplest ways for people to connect with each other, and it's like we're trying to find all of these elaborate solutions, and sometimes the simplest answer is the simplest. I mean, obviously there's a lot of machinations that go into it, and like this is part of the reason I created this really specific system to help people touch each other. But I mean, I think it could push us more in a direction that we're looking to go and address a whole bunch of different issues and problems.
You bringing up the pets thing reminds me of comedian Eliza Schlesinger, and she just had a Netflix special called Elder Millennial, where she's like 35. And a huge piece of that stand-up is about how like women in their 30s start displacing their mothering impulses onto their pets.
Oh, totally.
And what it's like for the dog, because the dog is like aware on some vague, like has a faint memory of not, of being afraid for some reason. And then she picks up this tiny little dog, and suddenly the dog's on its back being treated like a baby. And, I think about that every time my partner picks up her cat, who clearly does not like being picked up off the floor for some reason. And you're getting back into this issue where it's like the rights that we find it really just bonehead obvious belong to human beings. Somehow we don't feel the need to extend those rights to the other creatures that we live with. And so you get like people who can't. That's why I look at it as like, oh, the warmth of, the love between a human and their pet or whatever, but it can go the other way. And I think often it does go the other way.
Right.
Where it's like you're just torturing this poor creature.
Well, but, animals are not always great with each other too. I mean, like I have two cats, and one of them I had her since she was a kitten. When she was about 5, the other cat we had died, and I thought she was really lonely, so I got her another cat, and she hates him. 6 years later, she still hates him, and he just will not take no for an answer. And I'm like, Hoover, you are that guy. I'm like, you would have had a harassment suit slapped on you so fast if you're a human, because you will not leave her alone. So, animal
world's very rapey. Yeah, lots of.
Okay, so so now we're talking about animal rape. Awesome. No, people do displace a lot, and pets are wonderful. I love my critters to death, but I also think they're not a substitute for other people. Mm-hmm. They can be a godsend, and they're wonderful, and they're entertaining, and they're fun, but they're not a substitute for other people. They're not.
There's something, maybe it's about, there's like the physiological level at which you can have a hugging machine, mm-hmm. but then there's the emotional level at which you can have a sort of unspoken understanding with a pet, but then there's the like mutual informed consent level.
Yes.
What do you think is happening at that level? Like, what do you think makes that piece of it so special and irreplaceable by robots or
it's how we recognize the people in our tribe, or our clan or our family, and I don't think that even needs to be, it doesn't have to be a ongoing thing. I've given, total strangers, really, really loving, tender hugs, and, where you're just feeling accepted. And I actually used it as the opening quote for my book. I don't know if you've read Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, about trauma.
No, I heard about this
so
book.
Good. Anyways, I pulled this quote out of the book because I love it so much. And he says, the most natural thing in the world is to cling to another human being when you're scared or frightened. This is the humans meant safety. If you were, thousands of years ago, if you were not with other humans, then you were pretty screwed, you were fucked. And we don't even have to go that far back. 100 years ago, not in Texas because we're all sweating our heads off here, but if you lived in a cold climate, you would sleep in a bed with all of your family members, because if not, you would freeze to death.
I was thinking about that with the biography of Abraham Lincoln, and that question, was he a homosexual?
Right.
And there was it was commonplace in those days
totally
for two grown men to share a bed, because there was only one bed in the cabin, and you kept each other warm.
Right. Human, body heat is, that when you don't have fuel for your fire and stuff. I have a friend who lives off the grid in Northern California, and we stoke the hell out of the fire before we go to sleep in the yurt. But it's not very much fun to get up at 7 a.m. to have to restart the fire when it's cold. And this is like elevation 2,000 feet in the Sierra Nevada foothills, so it's not even that cold in the dead of winter, it's, maybe it's around freezing, that's not the same as like trying to restart the fire when there's, like feet of snow on the ground.
Right.
It's just, it's so intrinsic to the human experience, and we've really gotten away from it. But yeah, you have to, there were so many periods of time when, you had to have other humans for your survival.
So to that point, you bringing up the professional cuddling piece of this, it feels to me as though civilization can be told as a story that starts with us needing each other and ends with us not needing each other, except through like commercial services, sort of on the go. Like, and I'm not saying that that's a great story, and I'm not saying I'm happy with the ending, but it seems as though, like there's a reason why they say like prostitution was the oldest profession, right? Because you kind of go up the hierarchy of needs, in terms of like what could be easily commercialized. So the very first things you get are touch and Wi-Fi. And then
on the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, no, but like sincerely, it does seem as though the fact that we have professional cuddlers speaks to the heart of the sort of mixed blessing of modernity, right? That on the one hand, wow, you can get paid just to do this, just to provide some very natural thing. But on the other hand, that there are some people that are so touch deprived in their lives that they feel that they have to pay somebody else.
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, I dug into this in the book too. Well, I mean, the whole book is kind of about this because one of the things that I say is that people don't touch their friends. So let me ask you a question. Do you know any, say, men in their 60s or 70s who are widowed? And if you do you go over and cuddle them because they don't have that option because their wives have died? Do you cuddle up with, say, maybe like a software engineer who's moved here from India and doesn't have friends and family around him and his mother has died and he needs comfort? People who are socially awkward or, who've been raped or abused as a kid and they know, they don't have that level of trust. There's a lot of reasons, and there hasn't been a lot of research done yet on professional cuddling, but from doing the work that we've done with Karuna sessions, I can say pretty unequivocally that for a lot of people the choice is not being touched by somebody you love and care about and being touched by a stranger. The choice is between being touched by a stranger and not being touched at all.
Exactly. But that's the thing, right? Is that it's not like there's a problem at the level of the individual here. It's that it's like we live in this time where professional cuddling seems like ethically airtight, like inarguable to me.
You'd be surprised how many people argue about it. This
Really?
topic pisses people off.
Let's get into a story about that in a second. Like this thing about, I don't know why I'm belaboring this point, but it seems like a tragedy to me that we've gotten to a point where the system, it's like basically, it's like one of these public-private deals, where the reason that we need professional cuddlers is because somehow we've strayed so far from a civilization in which people are comfortable with that.
Right.
That you can move from a city to another city. You can be that Indian software engineer and move to a new place and immediately make physically affectionate friendships.
Right.
Or like you are an elderly widow or widower, and you have this, this extended peer group that's comfortable with like holding you.
Well, in old days, when we had multi-generational families, like my mother's a widow and she gets tons of touch from my 6-year-old niece. My niece is very, very touchy-feely, and she's like all over Nana. And that was how elderly folks used to get their touch needs met, or, obviously like sleeping in a family bed. But, that's part of the reason that I wrote the book. It's like I want people, the thing is though, there are people in, who have like big communities and have large groups of friends, and they're still not getting their touch needs met because we don't have social scripts for how to touch our friends. So I wrote one, and, I'm hoping that it'll help people to get over that hump, because it's like once people start doing it again, they're like, oh my God, this feels so good. But, I don't think we can really look backwards or go backwards. Like one of the ways that I've started describing what we do both with Karuna sessions and how the book is set up is it's paleo cuddling. It's just the same as the paleo diet. It's like you didn't have the caveman stopping by Whole Foods to get his free range lamb at the end of the day and taking it home to cook. It's like we're taking the idea of what it was like to live in the Paleolithic period and updating it in a way that's more palatable to modern people. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do with touch, is saying, this is something that we've evolved with, but I hate to sleep in a bed with another person. It's like if I were going to be hooking up with somebody, I would be like even before we started, I'd be like, we can totally snuggle afterwards, but when it's time to fall asleep, you're leaving.
Get the hell out.
Yeah, I don't like to sleep in a bed with another person. I'm a really light sleeper and I need my beauty rest, and I just don't, so it's like that system wouldn't work for me. But I love having my friends come over to cuddle with me, or to share touch in some way, where it's more specific, because I think a lot of things that have happened in the ways that we've lived in the past have just kind of been for survival or the path of least resistance. And it's like, let's try to consciously and deliberately design a way to do this that works for people.
So what is this? How much of this script are you comfortable talking about? I mean, I know you get people to buy the book, right? But like what are your recommendations?
Yeah. So, well, the way that the book is set up, the first third of the book or first half of the book or so is just looking at touch from a bunch of different angles. It's looking at the cultural factors and, what effects it has on our body. I talk about the hierarchy of touch. I talk about the fact that there are different touch types, just like people have different, like some people have high sex drives and some people have low sex drives. It's, some people want to be touched all the time and some people don't. And then I kind of create an ideological framework, and philosophical about what we're talking about, because the idea of nurturing human touch is so foreign to people. It's like we just don't, it's like this whole slice of how people touch each other that's kind of social in nature that we've lost. It's like you see primates doing it all the time, but we don't do it with each other. And so then the second part of the book is like, it takes you through the entire thing. Like, here's an email that you can send out to your friends. And it's meant to be done in a group situation so that it's a social thing. Because anytime that you have two people touching, we associate that with something that's sexual. Like if you and I were to start, like if we decided to like lay down and snuggle, I would be like, I don't really feel comfortable with doing that, Michael, because I don't know your partner well enough to know if they would be comfortable with that. And I don't like to cross boundaries like that. But if your partner was here and maybe like one other person, then it totally changes the dynamic and it becomes something that you're kind of doing as a group activity. So I talk about the, like I set it up with an email. I talk about, like I put together like kind of a social contract for people that they sign, and the idea is that everybody is on the same page. And then this is how you set up your space. Like you don't really want to do it in a bedroom unless you have to, like it would be great to like do it here on your living room floor, because then it doesn't feel like it's a sexual thing. We take people through a series of boundary exercises, and then I think there's 12 different activities that allow you to progressively get physically closer to a person. Like the first one, you start out just one person touching the other person's hand. That's it, which for some people it's like, okay, that's fucking weird, because it's like, it seems like such a simple thing, but yet we don't really do it. So it's like, you go through these different exercises, and then, you get to the point where you're, maybe lying down face to face, holding another person, which does have sexual connotations. And, you may be like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that again because it just feels too intimate or what have you. But, so the idea is then that when you've gone through all of this, and everybody's, when people are like, oh, wow, this was really a lot of fun, then you have this common frame of reference so that it would be easy to call you up and be like, hey, Michael, why don't you come over to my house and, we'll snuggle up on the couch and watch a movie. And that that's exactly what I'm asking you for, and that it's not that it's not some sort of code, or that I'm, being oblique, and that I'm asking you for one thing, but I really want another. So, yeah, I mean, basically it's creating a script and a structure for people to try this out in a way where it doesn't feel like it's getting sexual. So, like anything else that's kind of unfamiliar, where there's not a common role for people to step in, or common archetypal roles that people take. I mean, like we're doing one right now, interviewer and interviewee. Even though you and I have not done this with each other, it's like we still understand what the role is. You ask me the questions, I give you the answers.
Admittedly, it made me very uncomfortable when you started asking me questions. I was like, whoa.
You're like, lady, don't pry into my private life here.
Yes. I'm just the guy at the desk, okay?
Yeah. And you're like, I have to kick that request up to management so that they see. So, yeah, I mean, but it's like, and I mean, if you watch kids, it's like they most of them don't have problems with touching each other. I mean, sometimes the parents have to like step in and be like, hey, don't hit her or him.
Yeah.
But it's like they don't like overthink and overanalyze it all the time. It's very natural for them to do. I'm seeing a lot of teenagers now who are more comfortable with it, where they're in high school and they're still being all snuggly with each other, which I love. But, it's like,
those kids are going to have a better life than I did, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, probably. Well, in some ways. But, it's like that.
So we feed them into the machine.
Exactly. But it helps, because it's like, these people are in your tribe or your clan already. It's like, if you have people that you have really close, intimate friendships with, it's like, why don't we take it one step further?
Well, I mean, on that note, I think a lot about the paleoanthropology of human sexuality and intimacy, right? Mm-hmm. And this notion that, Helen Fisher's work on the neurochemistry of love, and her, I guess, conclusion was that there's a reason that we go through the kind of hormonal infatuation cycles that we go through that result ultimately, that culminate in, a long-term bond with somebody that's not especially spicy, but it's deeply loving. And that has to do with how long it takes for two people to have a child that can then grow to being like reasonably self-sufficient and can be up walking around and interacting with the other members of the tribe, and suddenly being like the responsibility of the entire community to raise. And that at that point, that people kind of fall out and find a new mate, and that, you look at modern society through that lens, mm-hmm. and the cuddle puddle, there's something about the rigidity of the boundary of the modern self compared to the porous, where the original boundary was around the whole tribe, right? And like everybody, there wasn't like a sense of property in the sense that like these things our tribe will defend, but like if we trust you, nobody's gonna accuse you of theft if you like walk into my room in the middle of the night and take the stuff and use it. It's your stuff too. And there's something about anonymity of touch in this age that seems also key. And I don't know if you've thought about this at all or what, but like specifically like being in a cuddle puddle, there's something about, for me, I've noticed the joy of not knowing whose leg that is. You know, that there's like something, it's not just about touching, but it's about being like mashed up in a spaghetti bowl of people that is like, you're relieved from even having to, you know, I mean, I assume, I'm not into anonymous sex, but I assume that's the appeal of anonymous sex, is that it's an archaic revival of some kind around like the boundary of a personal identity.
Well, I mean, if you were in a cuddle puddle with, or, you know, sleeping in a big pile with your tribe mates, you know, back in the day, it wouldn't really be anonymous, you know, because it would be people that you know. And it's the same thing here of, you know, you're in a cuddle puddle and you've consented to be there, and the people who are in it have consented to be there. So, you know, even though you don't necessarily know whose leg that is, I mean, I would say
It's still a safe leg.
It's a safe leg, but it's also, again, you know, it's like this is how our species evolved. You know, that was what safety meant. Safety meant that you had your tribe close to you, so that, you know, that you weren't going to get killed because you weren't on your own. You know, they had you there. It's so funny. I read this thing a while back. The guy was, you know, go. I can't remember. It was some article about why, you know, everybody's striving for happiness is bullshit. And, you know, the guy was like, he was like, well, you know, everybody talks about oxytocin being the love hormone, but, you know, making you happy isn't going to really help when, you know, there's a wild beast running at you. And I was like, oxytocin's role wasn't to make people happy under those circumstances. It was so when your tribe was starving, you weren't going to like throw the babies or the elderly people off the cliff or abandon them. You know, it's a bonding thing, you know, and, you know, yeah, I would argue that feels good and safe to you, not because of the anonymity, but just because it's familiar. It's like, it's in our DNA. I really and truly believe that.
There's also, I mean, to counter that guy's argument directly, oxytocin is not just for feel-good cuddly stuff, but they found that people with high oxytocin levels are also more jealous and more aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, well,
and
but,
so, you know, there's that.
But
like, maybe you would be more willing to fight a wild boar.
But of course you would, because it's like, you know, it's produced when you have a baby, and it's like you want to protect your baby from harm. You know, of course you're gonna. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's like everybody's like, oh, it has a dark side, and, you know, it promotes in-group bias, and it's like that's not a bug, it's a feature. You know, it's like you want to be able to protect your offspring, and, you know, and protect the members of your tribe. You know, yeah, I mean, it's complicated like everything else is. I really try, you know, it's like there's a lot that can be said, you know, about the mental effects, or, you know, on depression or anxiety or this or that. I really like to focus on the physiological effects, you know, because it's like, you know, lower blood pressure, relieves inflammation, painkiller, good for your heart. I mean, these are things that are good for your physical body, you know. And we're not talking about that. We're not really, you know, again, it gets back to reframing or rebranding touch as something that's an element of wellness, you know, of physical health, you know, that when you like it, it's good for you. There's something that I've noticed in our sessions, and I'm dying. I really want scientists to dig into this more. I'm not a scientist. I don't, you know, but I would love to see more experimentation around it. There's something that happens when we're in our session, you know, it's like for the first part, when we have our hands on people, we're doing, kind of the similar to what I was talking about with the book, where we're progressively getting physically closer to each other. Mm-hmm. So, we're doing very light touch on the person for about 20 minutes before we put them on their side and cuddle them in between us. And there's something that feels like that happens about 7 minutes in, where it's like all the little micro muscles in their body just relax, and it's like the safety is like completely penetrated to them. And I mean, it's crazy. Like I've thought about marketing this as a beauty treatment, because people look 10 years younger when we're done with them. There's just it's just a relief, of, oh, okay, I belong, I matter, I'm important, I'm here, I'm with other people. It's so simple and yet so profound.
Do you think that we're at this point where the crisis of touch deprivation has reached its peak? We're aware of it. The reason we're so aware of it is because it's on its way back down to like healthy levels? Or do you think that we're sort of coming awake just at the moment where it's, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think that this is properly described as a crisis? Do you think that this crisis is getting worse? Or do you think that we're starting to understand enough about this stuff that we're going to be able to start implementing systems on a much more pervasive scale?
Well, if I have my druthers about it, that's where I'm kind of going business wise. Something that I'm fascinated about, that I'm planning on talking about a lot, is that, loneliness is being called a public health epidemic. And you look at the physical things that happen to you when you're lonely, they correspond exactly with human touch, with the positive benefits of human touch. And, I'm reading about all these articles about loneliness all the time, and nobody is talking about this. No one is talking about this. And, I don't, it's not, it wouldn't be that hard to set up systems that would do it. It's like, again, you have to follow a model where you're basically teaching people, you're giving them a framework in which they can learn to touch each other. But, one of the beautiful things about it is, once people are trained or they have that common mindset, it's free. It can be done peer to peer. You don't need a lot of equipment. People don't have to go on a special diet for it. It's so simple and so easy. All you really need is two people, who are
willing to agree.
Yeah, who are willing to agree, that's the hard part. That's where we get stuck. Not only is it the willing to agree, but it's like, we don't even know how to ask for that.
Yeah.
If I were to hop on Tinder tonight and, try and find somebody who wanted to, to snuggle with me, I'd be, they'd be like, they wouldn't be going for it, because it's like that it's too weird for a lot of people,
Although that might just be like, Tinder's a pretty seedy bar, as far as that kind of
right, but that's
non-sexual activity is concerned.
Right, but it's the bar where people are mostly getting their touch needs met. That's what it's come to. It's so funny. I find it so interesting that people are quote unquote getting their touch needs met through sex, because most of the sex that people say they want to have, or hookup sex, it's like, it's not very touch rich. It's not very tender. It's not very kind. It's like, no, sorry, I just met you 5 minutes ago. I don't want to have anal sex with you. It's like, it's not nurturing. It's not sweet. It's not gentle. It's not people being nice to each other.
Makes me think a lot about this. Under the undercurrent of this entire conversation has been specifically like men and men having touch issues. Like, you mentioned earlier that like being female, it's like you maybe have more access to non-sexual
Totally
snuggling. And I wonder, like, I guess that's like a specific topical area that for sure is getting better, don't you think? Like, for sure, I am.
You think it's?
I'm 1,000 times more physically affectionate with my male friends than my father was or my grandfather.
Maybe. I mean, there's still a lot of men who aren't that way. I mean, this is something that really, really hits men really hard because, they're told that the only way that they can get their touch needs met is through sex, and with much less of an access to it. There are some men who are more physically affectionate with other men, but there are other men out there who, they'll go, the only time they get touched by another human being is when they get their hair cut once every 6 weeks. I mean, literally. Or, when they go to the doctor and, the doctor's examining them and they put their hands on them, and, medical touch is certainly valuable, obviously, or I put it in the category of therapeutic touch, but that doesn't always feel good. There's still a lot of fear around homophobia. It's hard for men. Like I have a lot of male friends who, because they know who I am and what I do and stuff, who, I'd be perfectly comfortable with them coming to me and being like, hey, I'm really having a hard day, can we cuddle or something? But, there's a lot of guys out there who would never ask that of a woman because they were afraid of it being misconstrued, and they wouldn't ask it of their male friends because, they'd be afraid of getting called a faggot or something, or worse.
Are you like a lawyer when you're off the clock and you're like, sorry, you gotta cut me a check if you...
No, God, no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's part of spreading the message. Sometimes I'm probably not as good with my boundaries as I should be. Like I want to, I don't want people to go away feeling sad or rejected. But at the same time, it's like I don't, to get back to the topic of men, it's like I think it would be good for men to be more touchy with each other, but at the same time, I can't make that decision for them. I mean, this is something that every single one of us has to navigate for ourselves. There is not a one size fits all solution, and and boundaries are hard for people because they're fluid. It's like no might mean not with you, not right now, not that thing, and the boundaries may be different 10 minutes down the road, and it's such a, it's not that hard to learn how to do it, but, we're not taught. I mean, my master plan for world domination in this field, I would love to see some sort of curriculum or, cuddle party kind of thing, created for teenagers, so they can learn these basics,
I'm imagining a public school instituting that, and like the parent calls.
Oh, totally. I know. I'm all like, I'm going to start with homeschooled kids, I think.
You'd have to.
Yeah. Or, have it be an elective, like, sex ed or something, and then, of course it's like, it has to be peer to peer. I mean, there's a lot about hierarchies and power that is around touch, that's part of the issue as well.
The ass slap, the condescending shoulder pat, all those little like...
Yeah.
The funny thing is so many of those... there's another layer to this, which is like a lot of people... I was just talking with this author, Kate Green, who spent some time in a Mars habitat simulation in Hawaii. And she was talking about how eating the like space rations that they, you know, like eating this very unvarying diet for 4 months that she was in there, she started to lose her sense of smell started to atrophy, just like the astronauts talk about how in space they stop eating as much because they stop being able to like understand the food by smelling it,
right?
And it doesn't like excite them or stimulate them as much. And I feel like there's maybe something going on in this. It's not just that people are touch deprived, it's that people are touch illiterate, like you know, like, and when my buddy got a sexual harassment charge, not like criminal charge, but complaint filed against him, it was just this, like, it was one of those instances, like speaking another language, like making a mistake in someone else's language, you know, that like we just don't, to some of us, it's so obvious that you can't touch somebody that way. I mean, you get into the basic rule of like absolutely everything is consensual, then you get around that. But like,
yeah, I mean, it's really compounded, I think, by being in the United States and being in this place where we don't have a monoculture, where it's such a melting pot, and you know, you have some people coming from cultures that, you know, where people would never think about touching each other, you know, like they don't even touch their families that much. And then, you know, cultures where everybody's like hugging and kissing, you know, and so it's hard to be touch literate. I mean, it just takes a little bit of cognizance and, you know, being willing to ask, you know. I mean, it takes 2 seconds to say, would you like a hug, you know, before you go in for it. And, you know, I mean, it's so weird for me, you know, like I can't imagine having sex with somebody who didn't want to have sex with me. I'm like, what is the fun of that, you know? Or, you know, what's the fun of, like, you know, touching or hugging somebody that doesn't want to be hugged, you know? It's like,
ask anyone who force cuddles their pets. I mean,
yeah, my one cat gets pretty bitchy when I have to pick her up. Like, she'll jump in my lap like all day long every day, but yeah, sometimes I have to pick her up because it's like, come on, it's time for you to get back in the house. But yeah, actually,
cat's like, I don't consent to this.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, it's kind of, I mean, you know, actually that's interesting because parents do that with their kids. You know, everybody like has an experience of, like, you know, being forced to like brush your teeth or something, you know, when you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
There's definitely some sorts of touch that are unpleasant, but that we still consent to them, or we, you know, as adults. But, you know, I mean, it's such a minefield, and it's really not hard to do it right. I read this great Twitter thread a while back about a guy who I think was a professional sound guy, and he was talking about, you know, he's like, man, I keep hearing about all these men who are like afraid to like have any sort of physical contact with women because they don't know how to do it. And he was talking about how, like, oftentimes he would have to put wireless microphones on skimpily dressed models, and he would go in and he would be like, I'm going to have to touch you, you know, in places where it's going to feel really intimate. Would you feel comfortable if there was a woman in the room? And before they could even say yes, he like called his colleague in, and then he would be like, okay, I'm going to be, I'm going to have my hand by your breast, and I'm probably going to touch your breast because I'm, you know, and you can do this by yourself, but, you know, it's probably easier for me to do it. But, you know, if you feel more comfortable. And, you know, I was just like, damn, that guy probably gets a lot of dates, you know, because that level of awareness around touch is so, I mean, that's fucking hot, you know. It's like, okay, you know, this person actually cares about what I want. You know, I mean, I gave up on online dating because, you know, like some of the stuff that people would offer me sexually, I was just like, are you fucking kidding me? You haven't even said hello to me yet. And you know, it's like, you know, back away from the porn. You know, it's like, I don't really have anything against porn. Mostly I just find it boring, but I kind of compare it to, like when MTV first started and you would like hear a song and then you would be like visualizing the video.
Uh-huh.
It's given that sort of script or storyline for sex, that just kind of spools through people's heads, and it's like, yeah, if that's if that's what you like, or that's fine with me, but it just doesn't really interest me that much.
Totally. Although in defense of even the most boring prosaic porn, I've noticed there's almost always a healthy amount of foreplay, or at least in the like abbreviated video that's available online, because they want to like hit the bases for everybody.
Right.
So, it's like she's always seems like she's always getting some, and there's lots of lead up. And then also naturally, except for the genre of this, you're like 100% guaranteed that everybody is down, that like everyone is consenting to this thing. But then again, that's sort of like comparing a shoot 'em up to a snuff film or something. Then you get into all of the other conditional stuff. I don't know. This is actually, we've been talking so much about consent. Maybe this is or maybe it's not the right place to end this. But the issue with like consent, like you can't ask a cat for consent. You can sort of ask a kid, a young child.
You should totally ask kids for consent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they know that. They trust their bodies
right.
still.
But like early enough, and it's like you get into issues of like communication. And then there's the whole thing of like when you talk about informed consent and the age of consent, and it's like, well now we know that your brain isn't really fully adult until you're like 25.
Uh-huh.
And now the age of consent is like in the most liberal sort of progressive states, it's 18 or whatever. And I just wonder, like, the more we learn about the brain, the more we realize that what we are calling choices are really just sort of like the output of all of these genetic, historical, like, psychohistorical factors,
right.
like all this stuff. So, like, what does it really even mean to choose? I mean, this is the issue of like, well, I said yes then, but I meant no now.
Well, I mean, a lot of it comes down just to the basics of that we're not educated how to do it. And, and then there's all, like you're saying, there's all sorts of other factors, I mean, if you're a woman and you say no to a strange man, that can get you killed. I mean, that it happens, it doesn't happen all the time, but please tell me how I can figure out, who's going to hurt me and who's not. But at some point it's like it's like if you give people permission to, to even play with it, to ask something directly, like I have a friend who kind of always like side loads his hugs, and he'll be like, well, it's like, oh, I'm hugging you, and it's like, dude, you're married and you're using this as an opportunity to grope me, and playing it off as being innocent, as opposed to, because it's like he couldn't just ask me that, hey, can I have a hug and can I grab your ass? No. It's like we don't give people permission to.
Wow, I've never even heard someone ask that question.
No, of course not. Right, because they know on that level that maybe that it's the wrong thing to do, but it's like we don't have like even just like the most basic forms of negotiation. I mean, it's stuff that we should be taught when we're 11 or 12, and it just it just comes a point where you have to take it at face value. If somebody's asking and saying yes or no, I mean, yeah it does get into issues of somebody saying yes when they really meant no, and I mean, there's a big stew of things. But part of the reason that I like doing this work just around nurturing human touch that's completely non-sexual is because it gives people like a very low stakes environment and setting and situations to practice with, it's a very beginner's way to play around with this thing. And I mean, I've had, like, we used to do cuddle parties for a while, and I mean, I had people who would come back a few times and they'd be like, yeah, this, the negotiations stuff, the stuff where we learned around boundaries, they're like, I took that out and applied it in, other parts of my life, whether that, like somebody saying, hey, let's go see this movie. No, I don't want to. It's like, we're so busy saying what we think we're supposed to say or asking what we think we're supposed to ask. And, it doesn't really necessarily take into account our real desires. So, to give people a place to like play around with some of this stuff and practice, with, especially if you're with a group of friends and you already know each other and you can be forgiving and make some mistakes and flub it up some. I mean, it's really, it makes it, I think, so that your consent does become more solid and grounded, when you really know, when you would really feel comfortable saying no or yes or what have you. It's a pretty easy way for people to learn something, and where they can then take those skills and apply it to the rest of their lives and apply it to their sex lives and stuff as well.
So where do you see this going, like into the future? I like to end these by asking if this recording is really in some sense for an unborn audience that's going to have a very different experience of humanity than ours does, then it's like an A and a B, right? A is, what would you hope to learn from them about the way that people are living? Like what would you hope to know from them about how people are touching each other in the future? And then what would you say, what would you hope to communicate to someone who doesn't, someone who's trying to understand what it's like to be alive today?
So I would like to see, this is a great question, thank you. I would like to see people approaching this in a lot of different ways. There's not going to be, there's not going to be a one size fits all need or solution. So, maybe there are different centers where people could drop in, and, once they've gotten the basic training where they're able to share touch with each other, I would like to see people going into other people's homes and providing them with touch. I would like to see touch integrated into support groups, a lot more peer group kind of stuff, where where you don't have to worry as much about the hierarchical nature, so like maybe you would have almost like a lifeguard, where you have a person who's kind of sitting, so it's like you have the nurse who's like sitting on the sidelines at the retirement home while all of the retired people, all the elderly people provide touch for each other.
Blowing a whistle when somebody's
hands
on a line.
Hands above the breath. Exactly.
They'll be used to that, right? Because that was just like school dances back then.
Right. Yeah. So I would like to see kids, get literacy on this, and, to really approach it as a place of play. I mean, it's interesting because originally it was thought that primates touched each other a lot. There's a lot of social grooming that goes on, and some of it is to like rid each other of vermin, but they've also found that it just fosters cooperation. It's that we are able to kind of see it as a place to kind of play and give our bodies a reset, just as something that's helpful to get us out of our heads and into our bodies a little bit more. And, for some people, exercise or meditation works great, and for other people it doesn't. But just to kind of put it back in the center of being human. It's literally how we can and do connect with other people. It comes back to connection and having people realize that, that it's okay. I mean, part of, I think, what I'm trying to do is have people write another story about what it means to be human and how humans treat them, because there's so much distrust and, pulling back and fear of other humans. And it's like humans can be nice to each other and be kind and tender and gentle and look out for each other. I think that, maybe it can help us be more of a global village.
Yeah. Well, any global village I want to be a part of is also going to be a giant cuddle puddle.
But it has to be consensual.
Oh, of course.
Or I don't sign off on it. I'll be like blowing my whistle all over the place.
What's that? Was it? Who was it that said? Was it any revolution? Like, I won't be a part of any revolution.
What's her name?
That doesn't let me dance.
Gertrude. It wasn't Gertrude Stein. It was her girlfriend. Was it Emma Goldberg?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't want to be part of your revolution if I can't dance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want to be part of the revolution unless it has to do with people being nice to each other.
Unless they ask nicely.
Yeah.
Would you? So you down for revolution? Thanks for asking.
No, actually, one of my my core philosophies or beliefs is evolution, not revolution.
Mm.
So I'm trying to take something that's very old and ancient and evolve it into kind of a new paradigm of how we apply it and use it and have it be something that's good.
Well, right on. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Where are we sending people on the web to you?
So you can find the book on all of the major book distributor platforms. The website is somebodyhold.me.
Oh, you got the .me. Nice.
I got the .me. Well, somebodyholdme.com was already taken. God damn it! I tried to find out who had that and why they had it, what they were doing with it, because I think they just have the domain parked. But yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, iBooks, Google, wherever I can sling it out, it should be easy to find. But yeah, Somebody Hold Me, the Single Person's Guide to Nurturing Human Touch.
And if they want to get you on your side gig, Karuna Sessions?
Karuna Sessions, yeah. We're based in Austin, and I call it immersive touch therapy, and it's pretty badass. It's really, really enjoyable. We have it's interesting. It's like a lot of professional cuddlers, like their clients are primarily men. Our stuff has been wildly popular with new mothers. It's like we're basically refilling their nurturing banks. It's like, here, let us do for you what you do for your baby all day long. So yeah, come in and get a session and let us take care of you for an hour.
Right on. Thanks. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks again for listening. Future Fossils is part of the Mind Pod Network, along with Synchronicity, It's All Happening, Third Eye Drops, The Astral Hustle, and a lot of other really great shows. I encourage you to go to mindpodnetwork.com and check them all out. And if you'd like inside access to all of the secret episodes and special goodies that I put out for Patreon supporters, clip on over to patreon.com/Michael Garfield. Check those out. Thanks again for listening. And remember, wherever you go, there you are.